everybody, it is Mariah, otherwise known as Blue Moonstone, and we are back with another Mining Mysteries video today. Today's Mining Mysteries video is taking place in a little bit of a different world, as you can tell by the background. Today we are going to be mining in Enchanted Hollow, which is my SMP that I have been playing recently. If you want to, you should definitely check out those videos. I have 2 videos up currently, and I'm focusing a lot of my time on it right now. And that's why Mining Mysteries is no longer a weekly series for me. But I do want to also make sure that I prioritize Mining Mystery in a different way. So this video is going to be a little bit longer. It's going to be a little bit different. And I hope you guys enjoy it nonetheless. So let's get right into it. In today's Mining Mysteries video, I have a few urban legends that I would like to share with you. What are urban legends anyway? Urban legends are folklore-related stories that are often passed down through generations. They're typically scary stories of unusual encounters of otherworldly beings that are deep-rooted in fiction, but many believe are true. The first urban legend that we are going to be going over today is the legend of the rake. What is it? The rake is often depicted as a strange, uncanny-looking humanoid figure with very pale skin, dark-set, almost glowing eyes. Its eerie image is often depicted in a crouch-like stance, and it is seen at the end of bed frames according to various creepypastas and storytellings. It has sharp, elongated claws on each hand, almost rake-like, that it uses to shred its victims, given the name. They say the silent creature creeps into bedrooms at night, watching its victims while they sleep, causing nightmares almost like your typical sleep paralysis demon. Although the rake is deeply rooted in fiction, originating back in the early 2000s on 4chan by a group of friends looking to create the next scripted folklore, and that they did, as it was later solidified as an extremely popular creepypasta only a year later. Stating sources that date back as far as the 1600s, these creepypastas are filled with stories depicting the horrid creature, one of which I have for you today. Here is the story from a witness in 2006. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip to Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids straight to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him up in the process. I apologized and I told him that I thought he had gotten out of bed, but when he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed so quickly, his knees almost knocked me out of the bed. Then he grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for a half second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, was what appeared to be a naked man, or a large, hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and his knees tucked into the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, it scrambled away from the side of the bed, and then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of way right along the covers until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. It was completely silent for 30 seconds, probably closer to 5, but it seemed like it was a while, just staring at my husband, and then it placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway leading to the kids' rooms. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop this thing before it hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet away. It turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter, Clara. The creature ran down the stairs, and as my husband and I rushed to help our daughter, she was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the rake." My husband drove his car into the lake last night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. Neither one of them survived. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly, and the police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for the answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a similar story. We got in contact and talked about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature that we now refer to as the rake. It took the 4 of us 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be the accounts of the rake. None of them gave any details, history, or follow-ups. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages and never mentioned it again. The ship logs explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people had mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and I left it running all night, every night, for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in bed each day when I woke up. By the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through the recording at 8 times its normal speed. It still took almost an hour every day. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the rake. I can't listen to it long enough to begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it. All I know is that I've heard it before, and now I believe that it spoke to me when it was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason the voice on the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head make me very upset. I have not seen the rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has still been in my room while I sleep. I know and fear that one night I'll wake up to see him staring at me. While the legitimacy of this story is false, there have been more claims and encounters of the elusive rake circulating around Reddit, and I'm going to share those with you as well. This post was made 14 years ago by Reddit user The Cat's Eye. The rake? Question mark. I'm gonna cut to the chase. Today I was walking home from my job at a med spa a few blocks away from my house, and for some reason there was a lot of traffic in that area, so I just decided to take a shortcut home. I, at the time, wasn't thinking about how stupid that was because I'd never been down those roads before. As opposed to walking straight across the street, I made a left and figured I'd just cross later on down the street where the gaps between oncoming cars should remain long enough for me to sprint through them. Just as I was about to turn right onto the street again, I could feel my phone vibrating in my Eeyore-shaped book bag. I shrugged it off my shoulders and held it in one hand, using the other to force into the book bag and paw around for my phone. I pulled out my phone and zipped the backpack up all the way, and I slipped it back over my shoulders. I glanced down at the phone, and my mom was calling. I tapped the answer button and raised the phone to the side of my face, still walking. Hello? I got no reply. Hello? I got no reply, just some static and muffled voices in the background. It sounded like my mom and her longtime friend who I'd known since I was about 4. I rolled my eyes, hung up, and slipped the phone into my pocket. When I looked up, I realized I had forgotten to turn down the street to the right. I figured it wasn't that big of a deal. I could try to find my way back or just call for someone to pick me up. I had friends with cars. I heaved what would probably sound like an overly dramatic sigh upon turning around, but I didn't continue walking. I had locked eyes with the most repulsive thing I'd probably ever seen in my life, and I couldn't move. I just stood there with my face blank and my eyes wide in shock. I wanted to move, to launch into motion and run to someone's house and beg for them to let me in. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. I just stared at it. It was crouching on all 4s, and it was an ashen gray color, and its skin looked like the surface of a powdered donut, just gray instead of white. It had a pretty human body, too. It was just hairless, but incredibly thin, beyond anorexically thin. All of its bones were prominent, and they began to crawl towards me. It was around 15 feet away from me, and I was still horrified. I could feel the muscles in my torso tighten, and my knees begin to tremble. Both of my hands flexed open, which I figured was indicative that I could move again. An unusual squeak forced itself from the back of my throat as I turned my heel and hauled ass down the street. It was probably because I pushed all of my muscles to move immediately, but either way, I just thought of it as weird afterwards. So yeah, I ran as fast as I could in the direction of my friend's house. She moved around a month ago and gave me directions to her new house in case it was raining when I came home from work, which was weird because my house was closer to it than hers is. Either way, I made it to her doorstep and I didn't know whether it followed me or not, but I wasn't risking anything. I threw myself onto her doorstep and beat the door with my fist at least 12 times until she answered, and I darted past her into the house, pulled her away from the door and slammed it shut, and then I locked the bottom lock because I didn't have keys to lock the top one. She demanded an explanation for my interesting entrance, and I told her everything. She brought up something about this thing called the rake, so I looked it up on her laptop and I immediately felt nauseous. Normally, I'd love to stay at her house and chill, but I wanted nothing more than to go home. So she made me eat something and then she drove me home. It's been 6 hours since then, and I'm really worried that it might find me. I keep thinking, what if it waited outside until we left the house? What if it followed her car to my house? What's gonna happen if it finds me? I'm honestly terrified. I've read several stories about the rake, supposedly real accounts, the creepypastas, random stories on other sites. My dad's supposed to return home in a few hours, so that's sort of reassuring. Anyway, I figured this story would be Reddit no sleep worthy, so I hope it is, because this experience definitely scared the hell out of me. Now, this is only one of many different stories I've found on Reddit, and it begs the question, is the rake really an internet hoax that a group of friends concocted, or is the rake really a creature of the night, rooted in fiction, but personified by something darker? Maybe an entity preying on the fragile mind of humans. This next urban legend I had never heard of before, but it is very interesting and I'm really excited to share it with you to see what you guys might think. So this urban legend is the legend of the Dark Watchers, 7 to 10 foot tall, dark humanoid shadows that often appear to be watching over travelers. Sightings have been reported for centuries located in California's Lucia Mountains. I may have said that wrong. But more specifically, they appear frequently around the Big Sur. They are often said to wear large brimmed hats, and they're often depicted carrying walking sticks. These creepy lurkers are said to be harmless as long as they aren't approached. Legend says that no one has been able to see them up close. The Dark Watchers are even mentioned in a popular book published by John Steinbeck, where he quotes, "Pepe looked suspiciously back every minute or so, and his eyes sought the tops of the ridges ahead. Once, on a white barren spur, he saw a black figure for a moment, but he looked quickly away, for it was one of the Dark Watchers. No one knew who the Watchers were or where they lived, but it was better to ignore them and never show interest in them. They did not bother anyone who stayed on the trail and minded his own business." But that's not the only source that has mentioned these Watchers. Sightings date back to the very first Spanish settlers in the area, and the sightings have not died down since. While I wasn't able to find any specific story of an encounter, I did find a couple comments in a subreddit relating to them. 5 years ago, a Redditor posted, "I grew up in Pacific Grove, and there is really something very palpable in the entire area. I have seen some very, very odd things in the woods and the skies over the years." 2 years ago, another Redditor says, "As a child, I spent many days in Big Sur, as my grandparents had built a home down Sycamore Canyon, and I can tell you that I always felt the presence of something in the woods, and I never felt like I was alone." Another Redditor says, "It's interesting, I grew up around some of these mountains, and as a child, not even heard of the legends, I firmly believed that I had seen giant creatures roaming through the wilderness. And when I first read these theories as an adult, I truly began to wonder if I had actually seen something. The mountains around the Central Coast are full of weird phenomenon. It is no wonder a military base was built there. They have excessive UFO sightings every year, even after the base ceased its operations. What would you do if you saw these giant shadowy figures on your night hike? What do you think they're here for? Would you dare to find out? Are they truly as harmless as they say, simply watching over the California residents like local guardians? Or is there something more nefarious going on here? While researching these urban legends, I came across another one I have never heard of before, so I figured I would share it with you guys as well to see what you might think about it. This urban legend reminds me a lot of the urban legend of La Llorona, so let me know what you guys think about this one. The Legend of Slaughterhouse Canyon. A popular tourist attraction for ghost hunters, the town of Kingman, Arizona has been known throughout history to hold some tragic encounters. The gold rush of 1858 brought tragedy to the town. Sickness and death quickly spread as miners realized how difficult it was going to be to find their fortune. A dense feeling of disappointment struck the town as families could no longer afford food. It is said that one of these miners lived with his family in a small wooden house in the desert. As he chased his dream to change their financial status, he wanted so badly to better their lives, but unfortunately the harsh reality of his situation got the better of them. One day, after setting out to work, the miner did not return home. Days became weeks, and his wife and children were running out of food and supplies. His wife began to spiral into madness, wondering what had happened to her husband. With the lack of sleep and the lack of food dwindling her down until her sanity was no longer holding her together, she lost her mind. She is said to have murdered her children, and she scattered their remains in the river. She knew that they would have endured a slow and painful death as they starved, but that did not stop the guilt from taking over her, and she sobbed at the edge of the river, crying until she succumbed to starvation. And it is believed that if you listen closely to the canyon on a silent night, you can still hear the screams and the cries of their mother. And while some people believe this legend to be a retelling of the famous La Llorona story, like I had said before, others believe it is to be rooted in fact, claiming that they themselves have heard the cries of this woman. Would you visit Slaughterhouse Canyon for a chance to hear the screams of the grieving phantom? The last urban legend I have for you today is one that is probably going to be the scariest out of all of these urban legends, and this is the legend of the Wendigo. The Wendigo is said to be a cannibalistic giant creature that is often depicted as a human that has been turned into a vicious monster. Some traditions believe that humans controlled by greed could be turned into them. It's a fearsome beast, often pictured as an emancipated figure, sometimes even as tall as 15 feet. It has sunken or glowing eyes, sharp, nasty fangs that it uses to tear into the flesh of what it eats. It can be coated in fur or hairless, and it's said to reek a smell similar to rotten flesh. It can have pointed ears and large horns. They are said to grow bigger as they eat. The Wendigo is most commonly thought of as a malevolent spirit or a demonic presence taking the form of the wicked creature, and they are said to reside in the northern woods of Minnesota and the forests around the Great Lakes in central Canada. There are several stories compiled on Reddit sharing the encounters of these terrifying legends, and I'm going to read some of them to you now. 12 years ago, this was posted to Reddit. It is titled Wendigo Stories. When I was young, I often spent parts of summer with my grandmother in her home out in the country. It was my favorite place in the world, and I always looked forward to the weekdays of gardening, baking, late-night fires with s'mores and ghost stories, and I enjoyed having my grandmother all to myself. There was a pond not far from her house where I would sometimes go to swim. It was home to quite a few frogs, and at night they made the most incessant noises. I complained to my grandmother only once, saying I couldn't enjoy the night breeze with all the racket. She took me on her lap and told me a story about the old man and woman who lived near the lake. The old man couldn't stand the singing of the frogs, but his wife told him that they kept the Wendigo away, and to harm them would be unwise. While he didn't listen and set about methodically catching all the frogs on the lake. It was a process that took some time, but he did not stop until he would rid the lake of the pesky amphibians. That night, without the protection of the frogs, he and his wife were slaughtered by the vicious whip-like demon creature with elongated fingers ending in razor-sharp talons and rows of silver teeth as thin as needles. I wrote it off as another one of her ghost stories, though she seemed more serious about this one. I never complained about the frogs again, mostly because I grew to enjoy them, and I put the story out of my mind. In fact, I'd forgotten all about it until it came up this past spring in a Native American literature class I was taking in college. The mention of the Wendigo sparked that old memory of my grandmother's story. I thought she had made up the word. I didn't realize that there were stories about it originating in. I'm gonna butcher that word, so I'm gonna post it here in these legends. Let me copy this. Hold on. Eager to connect something from my childhood to the topic, I googled it, only to find that my grandmother had apparently been mistaken. There was nothing I could find about the story she told me, nor any of the references of frogs providing protection from the Wendigo. In fact, the Wendigo legends seemed very little like my grandmother's version. They were said to be insatiable, craving human flesh and sometimes created from the forms of people who had resorted to cannibalism to survive. Descriptions varied, but they sounded almost nothing like my grandmother's boogeyman version. I actually chuckled as I read it, almost a bit embarrassed by how badly my grandmother had messed up the original tale. I changed residences this summer, moving to a newly built 1,000 square foot on each side duplex on the edge of town. The either side is to be occupied by my landlady who'd had the place built. However, she isn't scheduled to move the rest of her stuff in and begin living there for a couple of weeks. She's waiting for her lease to end, and even though my new place is only a few minutes from the edge of town, it feels much more isolated. I enjoy the seclusion of my new home and its proximity to the more natural setting. I'm surrounded by woods, and from my patio I can even see a pond beyond the carefully landscaped lawn, which is meticulously carved out from the surrounding woodlands. Just like the pond near my grandmother's house, the frogs have put up a ferocious racket lately, and I prefer to not pay to run my air conditioning if I can help it, so I have every window open to catch a breeze. That means that I can hear them as clearly as if I were standing on the water's edge. It took only a few days to get used to the noise, and I'm fine now, just like I was all those summers ago when I was young. In fact, the noise has been comforting me during the stress of the move. But tonight is different. I find myself standing in my living room, staring at where the pond is, though I can't see it in the dark, and the air is eerily still and oppressively warm. But all my windows are shut, and I feel impossibly cold. I long since convinced myself that my grandmother's story had been a silly tale, twisting of an old legend by storytellers, but for some reason I have the most overwhelming sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. I don't know what to do. I'm trapped. Leaving my house means braving the darkness beyond my home. And I don't know if I'm gonna be safe in here either. The frogs have stopped singing. I have another post written about 9 years ago. This one is titled, I Think I Encountered a Wendigo. My wife and I have been running the rat race for years, with a family, a house in the city, 2 dogs, a cat, the stereotypical American dream. But the city took its toll. The neighborhood got worse, the crime rose, and we found ourselves looking for a way out. Our opportunity came when I was offered a new job out of state. It was a great career move, but we didn't want to move to a new city just to have the same problems again. So we started looking around, and we found a great mountain community about an hour and a half from the job, and a great ranch-style house with a big back porch, windows everywhere, and a lot of property. The backyard has a big grassy area and a creek that cuts the property in half, and then acres of woods beyond. It's huge. The house is more than twice the size of our house in the city, and it's all updated, and it has no neighbors within a mile. It's a radical change from the life that we lived, but best of all, it was less than a half of what we were paying for our old house. The house was a foreclosure, and when we asked the listing agent about it, she simply said the old family had abandoned the property, and we really didn't think anything of it. The first 3 months were uneventful, with us settling into our new life, the kids getting used to the new school and new friends, but most of all, us getting used to the big house and the big property. But then the weather turned cold, and things started to get weird on the property. It all started with noises from the back property, things we chalked up to being the woods. Then the motion lights around the house started going off randomly, and once again we just chalked it up to living in the woods. But last night it all changed, and last night was the most terrifying night of my life. One of the dogs was at the back door, whining and scratching. I assumed he needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed my flashlight and I walked out the back door. Instantly something felt off. Our dog bolted for the back property, growling and snarling. It was a cold night, about 30 degrees, but the dog plunged straight into the creek. and out on the other bank, running off into the woods on the back property. Flashlight bouncing, I ran after him, calling his name. I got to the creek and made my way across the makeshift bridge, trying desperately to follow him. I could hear the dog still growling and barking from somewhere up ahead, and I pushed further away from the safety of the house and deeper into the woods. And that's when I heard it. A shriek like I'd never heard before in my life. It was a mix of a moaning wail and metal on metal. It echoed through the trees and froze me in my tracks. And my dog bounded its way back to me and cowered behind me. I turned around and could just make out the warm glow of the house behind me in the cold dark ahead of me. I swung my flashlight around wildly, looking for the source of the noise. And that's when I heard an even more terrifying noise. Out of the cold silence, my wife's voice floated all around me. "Babe," the voice called out, and I whipped back around and could just barely make out the image of my wife, safely inside our house. But the voice called out again. "Babe, I'm right here," came the voice, from deeper in the woods. Then came another voice, just as clear as the other. It was my dad's voice. "Come out here," it called, and I swung the flashlight around again, and this time I caught the briefest glint of light bouncing off of eyes. The creature was in my beam of light for barely a second, but it was tall, maybe 6 feet, and ashen white. It had long, spindly fingers that grasped the trunk of a pine tree, and then it was gone. I turned back and ran towards the house. I ran headlong into the icy creek and I stumbled, and my dog ran past me, making it back to the yard and up to the porch. I dug my hands into the freezing muddy bank and I pulled myself up, not stopping to look back. And when I reached the porch, I scrambled inside. My wife ran over to me, asking me what had happened, and I just shook my head. I'm not certain myself what had happened. I had a growing sense of dread tonight as the sun began to fall, and we kept the dogs inside. I haven't dared to look out the back, but as I sit here typing one by one, my motion lights in the backyard keep going off. That one is pretty creepy, but I have another one for you. This one was posted 7 years ago. It is titled, "My Wife Turned into a Wendigo." The winter season was upon us, and droves of Wendigo spotters had descended upon our small town to try to get a glimpse of something that I believed didn't exist. It all started 2 years back when Billy Fisher brutally murdered his wife Jane and her 2 poor daughters. When he was arrested, he claimed, in his defense, that he was driven mad by some kind of beast that followed him home from the lake when he was fishing one night. It affected me and my wife greatly as we were neighbors. We had no kids of our own, so we looked after the girls whenever we could. We loved those 2 girls, we were close friends, and when he came and asked me for help, I honestly thought he was crazy. I wish I had listened to him though, and ever since, the town has been full of conspiracy theorists looking to get a sight of something that apparently didn't exist. I was sitting down in the living room watching the TV when I heard my wife scream from the kitchen. I ran in to find that she had dropped the meatloaf all over the floor. Concerned, I asked her what happened, and she seemed terrified. She told me that she seen something staring through the kitchen window at her, and it had big red eyes. I tried to reassure her that it was probably one of those Wendigo spotters trying to get a picture of us locals, that they had been known to do that. They come up here and they think it's a fair game to harass us and trespass on our land. But after my wife calmed down, we decided to go to bed. I made sure that all the windows and doors were shut, and that night I tossed and I turned. I awoke to find my wife missing from the bed. I could see my breath, and the air was brisk. Someone had opened the bedroom window, and I went to close it, and that's when I saw my wife standing in the back garden, staring into the woods. I called her name, but no reply, and I ran down the stairs, and all the windows and doors were shut, and the keys were still in the drawer where I had them. Even though I had my housecoat on, it was still cold. It must have been below freezing, and my wife was just standing there in her nightgown. I called her name, and she didn't acknowledge me. I shouted at her, and I shook her till she came round, and eventually I got her back in the house and back to bed. The next morning she remembered nothing, and at first she didn't believe me. She thought I must have dreamt about it. It wasn't until I showed her the mud on her nightgown, and I didn't blame her for being perplexed about the whole situation. It was totally out of character. Apart from chasing a few out-of-towners off my land, it was an eventful evening. That night, before we went to bed, I made sure that everything was double locked and I hid the keys. Horrible nightmares filled my mind as I slept, and I dreamt of monstrous creatures that stalked the woods behind my house. The creatures walked upright like humans, but they weren't human. Their legs were similar to that of a goat, but big and strong. It had massive talons for hands, and it had a leathery, jet black skin with deep red scars covering its torso. Its head looked like a skinned goat's head, and its eyes glowed red, with big, towering antlers sprung out from its back. As it stalked me through the woods, I could hear it calling me, but it sounded like my wife. I turned to see my wife standing there. As I walked toward her, she transformed back into the beast, and that's when I woke up. My wife wasn't in bed with me, and the sheets were covered in blood. I felt a searing pain all over my chest, and I looked down and saw that a load of deep claw marks were dug into me, and I heard a growl that came from the corner. I looked to find my wife covering. She was shaking while licking the blood off of her fingers. She seemed delirious, and she screamed at me not to come near her. She was hungry, was all she kept saying. And eventually I calmed her down. Her temperature was through the roof, so I decided to call a doctor. And when the doctor got here, I brought him up to the bedroom to see my wife, and I left them alone while I went downstairs to make some coffee. And as the coffee brewed, I heard a gut-wrenching scream that came from the bedroom, and then the doctor came sprinting down the stairs, screaming that she bit him, and he ran out the door without looking back. I sat with my wife, and I watched over her as she tossed and turned all night. She rambled on for hours about the woods and how hungry she was, and eventually I drifted off to sleep. But when I woke the following morning, my wife was gone. After frantically searching the house, I found no sign of her except for a note that was left on the kitchen table. And the only words on the note were, "I love you." A few days after I reported my wife missing, the police called me to the station and showed me security footage that was taken the night before. 2 bodies had been found near the woods, badly mutilated, and my wife was caught on camera walking away from the scene near the woods. I know my wife is out there somewhere, in the woods maybe. I have seen the form she takes on from time to time. Now I spend my days searching for a way to bring her home. Which one of these urban legends do you fear the most? Personally, for me, I will be surrounding myself with protection because I am not about to meet a cannibalistic creature out there in the woods because I do live in the country. I hope you guys enjoyed this video today. I know it is a little bit different than the other mining mysteries videos, but I think it is pretty fun. I had a lot of fun researching these urban legends. I would like to do more, so comment some urban legends that you have heard so I can research them to do videos for you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye!